Hello again. My name's Dr. Christopher Stratman, and this is the fifth video in the Introduction to Artificial Intelligence. This fifth lecture is going to cover the ethics of artificial intelligence. So let's get right into things. What I want to focus specifically on are decisions that we make, decisions using large language models. So this would be decision-making models and how that affects the public in general. In the previous lectures, we considered how artificial intelligence will drastically alter the way we live our lives. Society at large will look very different if things keep progressing the way that many people think it will. And so, what I want to do then is consider how exactly AI is going to impact our decisions, the sort of choices that people have to make, whether that be politicians, doctors, educators, and so forth. Another way of thinking about that is how might we use artificial intelligence to help us make those decisions? And what ethical principles or ideas should be employed when we're considering the decisions that we need to make using these large language models? Indeed, there are a number of important questions and issues that we're going to need to consider. One of the most important is the contact between large language models and the public with regard to various assumptions that we have about biases. Remember, in previous videos, we talked about how AI systems are largely biased because they're trained on the data that's available online, and much of the behavior that humans display online are already biased. And so you can think about how biases are baked in the cake, if you will. It's sort of embedded in the very data that's used to train these large language models. And so that raises a natural question. To what extent will society even trust the decisions that are made by these AI systems? And in order to get a better grip on this issue and how we might go about solving it, we need to consider the ethical principles that are employed when we're thinking about whether and to what extent societies even should trust these models. To what extent do we have justification for thinking that what the decisions are the best decisions for us? Take, for example, the way that our government works. Generally speaking, our government in the United States relies upon both the decisions that are made by average ordinary people like you and myself when we go to the polls and we vote, but it also relies upon the decisions that are made by politicians and the people who are giving the politicians information, the people that are giving advice to the politicians. If we all start relying upon artificial intelligence in order to make public policies, and of course, these are policies that make a huge difference in everybody's daily life, what will that do to society? What will that mean for your everyday go of things? Or consider going to war. That's a very important thing that people have to consider. Government officials, like the President of the United States, if he or she relies upon large language models or AI systems of some sort, or if maybe they rely upon other people who are advising them, and those folks themselves rely upon artificial intelligence, when they make these sort of decisions about when and whether to go to war, what results will come from that? Could you imagine an AI system telling the president of the United States that we should strike, say, Saudi Arabia because of X, Y, and Z reason? Or maybe the person who's giving advice to the president is themselves relying on that AI system. I mean, it's really difficult to think about what happens when these life and death decisions are taken out of the hands of everyday ordinary people or experts and instead put it into the hands of artificial intelligence. On the other hand, you might think, well, actually, artificial intelligence are in the best position to make those sort of very difficult decisions, whereas somebody like the president of the United States may be ill-equipped or simply not really in the best position, not an expert. And we've maybe had previous presidents like that. And so maybe we would want to have an AI system with a finger on the button, so to speak, rather than some less than qualified person. So then it's important to try to imagine a world where AI is in charge of making the decision to launch a nuclear strike or not. Would we want to live in that sort of world? Or consider, for example, physicians and doctors. If doctors started relying upon various artificial intelligence in order to make diagnosis, would we trust their decisions? Or maybe again, it should be the artificial intelligence systems that are actually making these diagnoses. Maybe they would do a better job than most, if not all, doctors, since many doctors are prone to error. Maybe that would make an important difference for the way that insurance companies work. At least in a society like in the United States, where a part of the healthcare system is really contingent upon various insurance companies and what decisions they make. So clearly, just by considering these three issues, government, when to go to war, and medical decisions, these are just scratching the surface. You can imagine it would go much deeper than that. But just by considering these three, it already becomes very clear that the decisions that are made by large language models, various artificial intelligence systems, are very important and should not be taken lightly. And that means that we need to consider various ethical principles and how that would impact the decisions that are made by these artificial systems. So let's consider that in a little bit more detail here. Take, for example, the principle of fairness or equity. Given how important these decisions are, it seems reasonable to assume that we should ensure that AI makes these decisions in such a way that they are being fair to everyone, that they're treating everyone in an equitable way. Hence the reason why various biases being baked in the cake and the very data that's being used to train these AI decision-making models, that seems like a very important problem that we need to tackle. And this is especially important when we consider the historically underrepresented people and minorities, people that have been treated poorly for way too long. So again, we need to think about how can we ensure that there is equal access to the benefits of AI, given that there are going to be all sorts of amazing benefits that come about from this technology. We want to make sure that it's not available only to the richest of the rich and unavailable to those who can't afford it. And when we're thinking about fairness and equity, we also need to consider what happens when things are unfair, when they are unequitable, when these systems make decisions that violate somebody's rights or that treat people in an unjust manner. So we might wonder, to what extent would the designers or the engineers or maybe the companies that own this technology, to what extent would these people be held responsible when AI makes decisions that do not treat people fairly or an equitable way? Another important principle that we would want to consider is the notion of explainability. How well can we explain this technology and the way it works to the public in general? Is the AI decision-making model even explainable? That seems particularly problematic when we ourselves don't really know what's happening when these models make decisions. What's happening in the black box? What exactly is going on when it learns how to do something, when it figures out how to be a better AI, if you will? Right? We don't know exactly what's going on in the black box. And so, how are we going to be able to explain the AI decision making models to the general public if we don't really know what it is that's going on? And so we might wonder, is it even possible to sufficiently inform the general public and those who are directly impacted, right? We are making a difference in a person's life in such a way that it could completely change and alter their life. It's a life and death situation in a lot of these cases. And so you would want to give sufficient information for the peoples whose lives are going to be altered as a result. For instance, we would want to make it very clear how these models were trained, what the data was, what are the biases that are a part of it, and anything else that might be involved with how these decision models work. So this notion of explainability then gives rise to another principle that we need to take seriously, and that's the principle of transparency. We want to adequately inform the public of how exactly the AI is being used. We don't want to use the AI in ways that people aren't even aware of. And I think that that's actually happening right now. I was on Facebook the other day, and next thing I know, I'm engaging with an AI, and I didn't even realize it. I thought I was just browsing through Facebook because I was bored. So we want to make sure that we're adequately informing the public of when AI is being used and that we're giving adequate access to the data that's being used. This is all a part of being transparent. And I think it's maybe one of the weakest aspects of our current technology and the way it's being developed. Another principle that is raised along these lines is robustness against manipulation. We want to make sure that the AI decision-making models are not manipulating us. They're not getting us to buy more things or to spend more time, looking at Facebook or, when we search something on Google, we want to make sure that it's giving us the best results and that it's most efficient, not that it's padding the pocket of the people that are investing in Google. If you've noticed anything about the way Google has gone, Google searches are not the way they're not what they used to be. All of a sudden, you're getting a bunch of really crappy results, and that's because there are people that are investing and making sure that when you search for something, you see what they want to see, not what would be what necessarily you want to see. And so there's a lot of ways in which AI can be used to manipulate the public, those that are directly impacted by the model. And we want to make sure that at least if that is happening, we want to make sure that we're transparent about it. But it would be better to make sure that we're not manipulating the public in the first place. Again, I think that that's happening right now in the development of this technology. And it's largely because this technology is being funded by a few corporations, a few businesses, and their incentive is to make money. It's not to, make your life better. They are going to make sure that they can protect their shareholders far before they have any obligation or responsibility to protect you. And since their interest is in making money, not protecting you, that gives rise to another issue that we need to take seriously, and that's data privacy. How can we make sure that it won't be hacked, that there's not going to be some violation of a person's privacy? When we turn over our most deep secrets, private information to some business because we are promised that it's going to make our life better, we want to make sure that that information isn't going to be let loose in the wild. We want to make sure that it's not going to be hacked and then used in ways that we don't approve of. And the next issue is really a kind of a legal issue. It's this notion of predictability. Legally speaking, we need to be able to rely on past precedents in order to establish some kind of predictability with regard to the behavior of different businesses or any other entity that would be using AI decision making models. So that way, if there is a breach of privacy, if there is a violation of somebody's rights, if we're not being fully transparent, if we end up manipulating people, if these companies are getting away with all sorts of, highway robbery, if you will, then we need some past precedent in order to establish some form of justice or maybe some form of punishment based upon the precedent that's established. And again, that's a legal principle that we need to rely on. So those are some of, definitely not all, but those are some of the ethical notions, principles that we should really take seriously when we're considering the ethics of artificial intelligence. But there's lots of other ones that we could consider too. So, for instance, one really interesting question that would relate to artificial general intelligence, the kind of intelligent life form, if you will, some godlike creature that we might create one day in the future that surpasses a human being's intelligence. If we do think that we could create some entity like that, we might want to know whether or not we have any moral obligations towards it. If we are morally responsible in any sort of way for this kind of artificial life form or artificial conscious entity, if you will. So this is another moral issue that a lot of philosophers are considering. For instance, Olaf Witkowski and Eric Schwitzgebel, two philosophers who I think are doing a lot of really interesting work in this area. They argue that in the future, if we do create this kind of artificial general intelligence that surpasses any human intelligence, a super intelligent being of some form, then yes, we would in fact have moral obligations towards these intelligent beings, these entities that surpass us and their wisdom, if you will. And that's because, according to Witkowski and Schwitzgebel, they say that creators of artificial lives, forms of this sort, may have special obligations to their creations, right? If we go about creating this artificial general intelligence, we would be obligated towards them in the same way that an owner of a pet or a parent of a child might be obligated to those creatures. Of course, some people might disagree, and this largely depends upon what you think this artificial intelligence actually is, which again is very difficult to answer if we don't really know what intelligence is, and if we don't really know what's going on inside the black box, if we don't really understand or comprehend how these machines are learning in the first place, then it just becomes very difficult to answer these questions. That's why at the outset of these video lectures, I talked about how lots of these issues are open questions, questions to think seriously about, but we don't have any solid answers regarding them. And if you want to look at this particular article by Witkowski and Schwitzgebel, here's the link for you. It's really interesting. I recommend you taking a look at it. And there's some other problems that we might consider too. So one particularly important place where the development of artificial intelligence seems to offer a lot of benefit, but also a lot of problematic aspects, would be in healthcare, specifically with regard to therapy and psychiatry. So this kind of healthcare, I think, is really important to take a look at. And if you want to consider it in more detail, one of my recent colleagues at the University of Texas at San Antonio, Şerife Tekin, she's done a lot of really interesting work. And so I would recommend you taking a look at her website. There's a website here. She's really done a lot of impressive uh, philosophy on this. So she's got several articles you can look at. But I do think that this is one really important place to consider how artificial intelligence both might benefit future societies, but also create a lot of problems. And again, this is only scratching the surface. There's many other issues that we could dig into. But I hope that these 5 lectures have at least given you a kind of nice little romp through some of the details of the ethics of artificial intelligence.